Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's Friday reflections on this, the early hours of Saturday morning. Today, I want to read to you this wonderful book, The Banquet of the Soul. Not the whole book, I'm just going to read to you one particular section. It's called Humility Foremost, and this is on page 183 of the book. Following on from the section that I was reading a couple of weeks ago. And this is from A Banquet for the Soul, Fine-Tuning the Seeker's Approach to the Divine Presence by Shaykh Hisham Kabbani. This is published in 2008. Still in print, if anybody wishes to get a copy themselves, and highly recommended. Humility foremost. We have not sent thee, but as a universal messenger to mankind, giving them glad tidings and warning them against sin. But most men understand not. We sent you not, O Muhammad, except as a mercy for all creatures. These are obviously quotes from the Holy Quran, from Surah Sheba, that's Surah 34, Ayah 28, and Surah Al-Anbiya, the Prophets, Surah 21, Ayah 107. Firm foundations. Mawlana Shaykh Hisham says, we spoke of tawada, humility, in the previous session, and that everything is achieved through humility. Nothing can be achieved by arrogance and pride. Grand Sheikh, that's Sheikh Abdullah Fayez Dagestani, wa alaikum salam. Sheikh Abdullah Fayez Dagestani said, the Lebanese students, Hisham and Adnan, were filled with arrogance. They thought they were above precedence. But he added, through my teaching, I had also taught them how to be humble. I showed them how to treat kings, and everyday people with equal degrees of courtesy. If you can cultivate humility, your character will be altered. Humility will draw you nearer to God, the Exalted. For humans, humility is the cornerstone. The entire structure of your spiritual life rests on it. Grand Sheikh was most insistent on this point. People today are arrogant. They are proud of their knowledge and believe they can teach everyone everything. Of course, Hisham and Adnan, referenced here by Grand Sheikh, were Mawlana Shaykh Hisham Kabbani and Mawlana Shaykh Adnan Kabbani. Two great sheikhs in Naqshbandi Tariqa, including the author of this book. But everyone has nafs, everyone has that within them. And unless we learn humility, unless we learn to transcend that nafs, everything we do will be completely colored by our nafs, by our arrogance, by our ego, which of course, arrogance and pride, bad characteristics. A lot of people today are just proud of anything. My dad, he would say he was proud of good things, like if someone did something, a good thing, or if he did a good thing, he would be proud of that. But today, people are not proud in this sense. They're proud of everything. Even things which they've done which are very bad, but they managed to get one over on someone else. They're not worried about how they did it. They're not worried about whether it was right or wrong. They're proud of themselves for having succeeded. When really they should be getting on their knees and begging to Allah for forgiveness. We all have a degree of pride in this time. There's no point pretending. We all have. We're all affected by this world in which we live. That doesn't mean we give up. That doesn't mean we just give into it. As I was listening to Sheikh Nurjan the other evening, I was actually building a piece of furniture in my daughter's room, and listening to Sheikh Nurjan on Spotify. And Sheikh Nurjan was saying, look, if Shaitan comes and slaps you, which means Satan gets us to do something which is bad, Satan influences us to do something, do you just take that? What he means is, if you get tempted to do something wrong and you do something which you know is sinful, this is obviously from Shaitan, this is from nafs, this is from either Shaitan or only inner demons. Do we just take that? That's like Satan slapping us. Or do we give Satan hell? Do we say, no, I'm not going to just let myself fall into this trap. I'm going to do extra charity, or I'm going to do some good deeds. I'm going to, clean my neighbor's garden, or cut her grass, or, just as an act of kindness, an act of sadaqah. Do we respond this way? Sheikh Nurjan was advising us, this is how you do it. And this is how you give Satan a big slap, or your ego a big slap. But how many of us do that today? And that's the reason why egos get the better of us. And as Mawlana Shaykh Hisham continues here, to learn humility, you must understand you cannot interpret the words of your Shaykh. This is a crucial point. While some things can be interpreted, when your Shaykh says something, you must not say, he meant this or that. Take what is said literally. Avoid interpretations, as they can take you in many wrong directions. I don't want to hear any more interpretations. Grand Sheikh said, you must take my words as I speak them. Only when you reach a certain level can you make interpretations. When you humble yourself, don't say that you are doing so. Keep it to yourself. It is your cornerstone. Build on your humility, and you will be on a firm foundation. We interpret what we hear more or less continuously. It's an ingrained habit. We tend to filter everything through the lens of our experience and sensibilities. These filters protect us in some ways and harm us in others. It is though we admit some colors of light and block others. These colored filters define who we are in many respects and highlight our strengths, our possibilities, our links to the divine attributes, and our weaknesses where Satan maintains his heavy hold. Filters protect us, but harm us in some ways. They protect us because, especially nowadays, there's all this disinformation and dark energies around us, negative energies, negative influences, all sorts of wrong information. And it's perpetuated because today anybody can be an author, anybody can be published through the internet, through social media. So, you do get some good voices come through that, but unless you can filter, you get a lot of rubbish as well. So your filters can protect you from this. But equally, those filters, when you're sitting in the presence of someone who is genuine, who is a good teacher, who is perhaps even a wali, a saint, It also filters the good stuff which they're telling you. So, it's a difficult one, because you have to know when to be a bit more open and when to be a bit more filtered. Mawlana continues, in this light, the exercise of not interpreting your sheikh's words takes on a special importance. The willing suspension of disbelief, or in this case, the suspension of interpretation, may temporarily, so his sheikh is only saying temporarily, don't do it all the time, but at certain moments, know when to suspend your interpretation and just listen, may temporarily open us to new ideas and influences by arresting the usual mental editing we do following each new experience. Inside our heads, this internal chatter would precede the outward act of hazarding an ill-advised guess at what the sheikh might have meant. Without humility, the foundation of your relationship to your sheikh will be built on shifting sand. The reason is simple. The failure to question our own notions about things before opening your mouth implies that what you are being taught is going in one ear and out the other, or worse still, right out through your mouth, even before the new material has been carefully examined and digested. See, before we can question a sheikh's teachings or a sheikh's interpretations of things, have we even questioned ourselves and our own notions, where our own ideas come from, where our own perceptions come from? A lot of us don't do that. We don't think about where we get our ideas from and whether our existing ideas are correct. This is actually what the parable that is on one of Yusuf Islam's CDs, another cup, comes from. It's actually Buddhist in origin, but the truth of it is it's not just about Buddhism. This is and I know it's Buddhist in origin because I've got a little Buddhist book that tells the same story. And this is just a very brief story where a professor came to sit with a sheikh. And the professor was sitting with the sheikh, and the sheikh offered him, would you like a cup of tea? So the professor said, yes, please. I'd love a cup of tea. So the sheikh goes away and makes a cup of tea. Now, this would have been Japanese green tea, and the sheikh would have been a Buddhist priest or monk, But the principle is the same. A man who has dedicated his life to spirituality, to examining himself, to doing what we call tazkiyah and nafs, even if the person was a Buddhist, It's the same principle. And it was a real incident. This really happened. And so the sheikh comes back with the pot of green tea and, stirs it when it's brewed at the right point. He starts pouring the tea in the cup for the professor. And meanwhile, all this time, the professor has been chatting away about what he thinks the sheikh might teach him. And the sheikh keeps pouring the tea and the professor keeps chatting away. Now, did the professor come to listen to the sheikh? Anyway, at one point, the tea is pouring out of the cup and it's going everywhere. And the sheikh keeps pouring. And at this point, the professor goes, oh, what are you doing? It's going everywhere. And the sheikh says to the professor, just like this cup, you must first empty your cup before you can refill it. You must first empty your cup. I mean, I've got a cup of tea here, a bigger one, but it's a cup of tea. It's got tea in it. If I don't empty this cup, I can't put any more tea in it. Same with our brains. If our brains are all full of other ideas, how can we receive new ideas? Listening is about keeping this closed and focusing on the ears. And as the information comes in, it is going not just into our brain, but into our heart. That's listening. If we can't listen, if we don't learn the ability to listen, even if we're not entirely in agreement, we can think about it later. First, we must listen. If we start questioning it before you even listen to it, we haven't even digested what we've heard. This is a skill for anything we're learning, actually. Even if you're going to a university and learning about science or history or geography or technology, you still have to sit in a lecture and listen. If you question the professor or the lecturer while they're teaching before they've finished, then you might interrupt the professor and stop them from saying something that was important that you should have listened to. Then afterwards, there comes a time for questioning. Even sheikhs, they open for a time for questioning. But some people, they don't wait for that. And they just question and start interpreting things according to their own way of understanding. And each of us has our own paradigm, our own individual. Well, a paradigm is a worldview. We each individually have our own worldview. Even you and I are Muslims. Your worldview might not be exactly the same as mine, even though we're both Muslims. If someone else is English, even an English Muslim, they might not have exactly the same paradigm or worldview as me. Same with two people who are Pakistanis or two Indonesians. We each have our own individual paradigm, our own individual worldview, according to what we've been taught and what we've learned. But a lot of us, at some point, we stop questioning this. We just assume that our own way of looking at things, our own way of understanding things is correct, or at least certain aspects of it are correct, when there might be other things that we haven't learned, which will help us come to, not to say everything we understand is necessarily wrong entirely, but if we don't learn these other things, we won't get the fuller understanding, the deeper understanding that will give us a better worldview, a better paradigm to understand the world. And this will give us more success even in this life, let alone in the next life. This is what Sheikh here is saying, that the reason is simple: the failure to question your own notions, your own paradigm, your own worldview about things before opening your mouth implies that what you are being taught is going in one ear and out the other, because you're not focusing on what you're being taught or what's being said, what's being discussed. You're focusing instead on your existing ideas, which are already here. When the new information might supersede what you already know. Otherwise, why are you sitting there? Just like the professor who came to the sheikh and the sheikh was pouring the tea. Well, if he already knew everything, why was he going to the professor to go and, going to the sheikh to go and listen? He had no need for the sheikh. Except he did. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been there. So make use of the time. Also, when we're fortunate enough to have some of these very special spiritual teachers come visit us, people like Mawlana Hamid Adil or Kiai Haji Yahya Khalil Stakov or Dr. Shoki Alam, or people of this kind of uh, caliber, then we should listen to them. May take the opportunity while we have. Some of these people, we don't even know how long they have left on this earth. I mean, none of us know how long anybody has left, but some of them, we can, just by using that common sense, we might realize might not have that much time left to be physically amongst us, because they are towards their end of their earthly lives. And we hope Allah gives them more health and longer lives. But just as a matter of common sense, we should appreciate them while they're here and still able to share what they've learned. Mawlana Shaykh Hisham says here, for sheikhs do, in fact, bring you genuinely new material. Using your old filters to block out or distort their teaching must be resisted, and the attitude of humility is the key. The light that a sheikh can shine on you is not ordinary light, not everyday information. Normal or diffuse light is weak and bounces off various surfaces, appearing as what's left over after the subtraction of color based on the absorption properties of whatever it first touches. This is what we see all the time: indirect, diffuse light. On the other hand, the light of a sheikh is like the coherent light of a laser beam. It carries greater power, transmits with more bandwidth, and is piercing. It is also rare and therefore valuable, and should not be muted, modified, twisted, or diffused like ordinary daily impressions. In short, when your sheikh is speaking, especially in this Sufi order, assume you do not fully grasp what is being said in all its dimensions and levels. Observe your reactions and avoid any thoughtless comments which can deflect the meaning altogether. Some sheikhs have a singular way of speaking. Their words address the precise circumstances of the moment, the collective nature of the audience present at that moment, and most remarkably, the urgent and separate needs of each listener. Even though all present are apparently hearing the same words. The experience of such a public, albeit private, communication from a sheikh is potentially humbling in itself. In this light, humility is not merely an attribute of the downtrodden, the meek, or the mild, nor necessarily a state following an unhappy humiliation, but rather a powerful tool to open the way to new levels of spiritual understanding and perception. A secret that protects itself, humility is a complete mystery to those who lack it. At the simplest level, it amounts to the ability to accept a gift graciously and marvel at its beauty. For the disciple, such a great gift has a price: open ears, open heart, and a closed mouth. Sayyidina Aisha and the mirror. Sayyidia Aisha, and the mirror. Which then is best? He that lays his foundation on piety to Allah and his good pleasure, or he that lays his foundation on an undermined sandcliff ready to crumble to pieces? and it does crumble to pieces with him into the fire of hell. And Allah guideth not people that do wrong. Surah At-Tawbah, Repentance, Surah 9, Ayat 109. Build your life on a firm foundation. Anything else will result in a collapse as surely as a poorly built house will fall in an earthquake. Everything will be destroyed, drop off a cliff into hell, taking the structure and all its occupants with it. Building on interpretation is not a strong foundation. The underlying foundation must be built on literal meanings. There is an example of this in the life of Sayyida Aisha. May God, the Exalted, reward her, the wife of. She was a notable teacher of the companion who often went to her seeking knowledge, yet even she ran into difficulty in the matter of interpretations. Grand Sheikh said, one day when the Prophet ﷺ was going to the mosque, and Allah said, O human beings, take all your medallions and ornaments when you go to the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ did not filter this command by way of interpretation. The properly interpreted meaning of this command is to maintain your best manners when going to the mosque. At this point, the Prophet ﷺ gave us a good example of how not to interpret a command and acted upon it, quite literally by grooming and dressing himself very carefully before setting out. Sayyida Aisha noticed that he looked particularly nice and stopped him at the door, asking, where are you going? The Prophet ﷺ said, I'm going to the mosque. She asked, why are you dressing so well and combing your hair and putting on perfume? The exchange might seem perfectly normal between an ordinary husband and wife. But Sayyidah Aisha was the teacher of the companions. Her knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ was unparalleled. As the notable wife of Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ, she is al-Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers, and not only a companion herself, but a teacher of the companions. This is a problem in all of us. No matter what your level, you must maintain a firm foundation. Aisha asked, where are you going? With the best manners, adab. The Prophet ﷺ responded, I am going to the mosque. She persisted, why are you dressing so nicely and putting on perfume? Do you still love the woman? Are you going to see a woman? No doubt. No doubt. Countless similar conversations occur every day across the planet when a wife confronts an especially well-groomed husband as he leaves to go out on the town. But Sayyida Aisha was to be held to a higher standard. The Prophet ﷺ replied, O my beloved Aisha, take the mirror and see who is in the mirror. She looked in the mirror and said, I see myself, Aisha, in the mirror. And Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Aisha, the mirror reflects exactly what it sees. We are all mirrors. I am a mirror. So when you look at me suspiciously because I am dressed nicely and looking well, you see what is in you. The believer is the mirror of his brother. You are seeing yourself, your own bad character. You are not seeing me. You still have the sickness of jealousy. Even though she was at a high enough level to teach the companions, nevertheless, from the level of the Prophet ﷺ, she learned of an imperfection and an imperfection in her spiritual foundation. So the Prophet ﷺ left, and he was not happy. Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Aisha's father, found out that she had somehow upset the Prophet ﷺ. He went to her house and asked, or what had happened. She told him what had transpired, and her father sternly reprimanded her in a way that the Prophet ﷺ would not. The shock of her father's scolding brought her back to herself. This woke her up and reminded her that a spiritual understanding required a solid base. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever humbles himself for his Lord, God the Exalted, will raise him up." A very important point, this. See, this point about the fact that we're all mirrors. Ya Aisha, the mirror reflects exactly what it sees. We are all mirrors. I am a mirror. So when you look at me suspiciously, because I am dressed nicely and looking well, you see what is in you. Before we before we jump to conclusions about anybody, this is a really important point. You don't know what their motivation is. You assume you know what their motivation is. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if that assumption, I mean, it comes from you, it does not come from them. It doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to do what you assume they're going to do, or for the reasons that you assume it. You are assuming that because that comes from yourself, because you might do that. You might behave in that way. So you assume that someone else is going to behave in that way. You might be right. You might be wrong. And obviously, in this particular case, Aisha was wrong because this is the Prophet ﷺ. His soul is pure. He is the purest mirror. As Mawlana Shaykh Hisham says, we only see in others what already exists in ourselves. The supremely polished heart of the Prophet ﷺ reflected a very clear image back upon those who were lucky enough to lay eyes on him. When we are not clean, these imperfections are reflected by those who are, in effect, psychological mirrors. Your brother will reflect your bad character. In other words, the detection of flaws in other people constitutes, more often than not, the recognition of our own flaws. If only we could recognize it. The acceptance of such a possibility is all the more difficult when you habitually see a great deal wrong with other people. The louder you complain about people, in or beyond their earshot, the less you have accepted the light from this special mirror. These magical mirrors work both ways. Some things are rendered altogether too invisible, while other images are masked. For example, an especially unhappy, exacting person might remain in a constant state of agitation, always overwhelmed by the perceived foibles of his fellow humans. At the same time, he might attribute a saintly act of charity to an ulterior motive and reject a well-meaning gesture from a friend. The one side, the mirror presented him with only ugly but unexamined things locked up within himself, and on the other side of the mirror, he could not see the goodness of a well-intentioned act, because there was nothing in himself that corresponded to such an image. How often have you heard it said that mirrors and cameras can be so unkind? The mirror alternatively shines and obscures. This unhappy, sharp-tongued person is in all of us. As Sherlock Holmes often said to Mr. Watson, you look, but you do not observe. When we complain about other people, we must first subconsciously recognize the flaw to even hang a name on it. Summon a name to our lips to assign blame, and in so doing, reject the deep meaning of the mirror, that the reflection is our own. Most social interactions are eventually poisoned by this very process. Learn to quietly accept the message of the mirror. Internalize these things you apparently see in others instead of immediately chattering about them to anyone who will listen. You are the one who has to straighten yourself out. Always blame yourself, blame yourself, blame yourself. What better exercise could there be for the month of Ramadan when backbiting is discouraged? Fast from food and also to fast from negative comments. The pattern is clear. If you succeed, even to a small degree, it is a beginning that might carry over into the balance of the year. Mawlana Shaykh tells us, consider the steady stream of people who come our way each day as messengers who, on the part of Allah's design, are telling us something about ourselves that we need to know. Don't shoot the messenger. Say rather, I am wrong. Don't let Satan trick you. Don't say, I am a friend of God. I am a sincere person. No. Leave such things to the Sheikh. The correct internal posture is to tell yourself, I am nothing. I am trying to learn to be nothing. I am not a friend of God, nor a caliph. I'm just nothing. Start with a clean slate. Then you'll be able to reach a higher level. It is our duty to respect our brothers and sisters, to reach the higher levels that God, the Exalted, intends for us. The Prophet ﷺ said, my Lord taught me good manners, and he perfected my manners. From this secret, you'll be able to learn and inherit. Prophet ﷺ was the human being with the best of manners. That's why people love to spend time with him, because he had the best manners. Even though he holds a position at the pinnacle of creation, he holds that position in sajda, prostration, and accordingly is humble before his Lord's creation, and even us, who are part of that creation. This central paradox rests on the Prophet ﷺ's abiding humility. While God, the Exalted, created everyone from the light of the Prophet ﷺ, he does not regard himself as above mankind, but rather as part of mankind. Such is the nature of complete transcendent humility. For our part, we must regard him as the highest in creation, even though he, the Prophet ﷺ, does not. Say, I am but a man like yourselves, but the inspiration has come to me that your Allah is one Allah. No one can reach the level of understanding of the Prophet ﷺ, whose knowledge began before the beginning of time. Quite naturally, Sayyidah Aisha's knowledge was not of this level, and she made a mistake. After she confronted her husband, she subsequently learned a valuable lesson. And so must we all. The occasional correction along the path keeps us on the straight way. This is why God, the Exalted, sent us here. Otherwise, we would have remained in paradise. We would not have understood the key to our trust had we only received praise. God the Exalted sent us to this world so we may understand the importance of the key. Our amal alone cannot take us, our actions alone cannot take us anywhere, but obedience to Allah, to His Prophet, and to our teachers will take us to our goals. The best spent wealth. Grand Sheikh, may God the Exalted bless him, said, if a human being spent all the wealth God gave him in the way of his Creator, he would never regret it, even if all the wealth of the world had fallen into his lap. We all look for the trust, the inheritance God, the Exalted, has in store for us. When you find yourself thinking, I want my trust, I want my trust, you will not get it. But when you lose hope of getting your trust, then slowly the Sheikh will give it to you. So you must decide whether you want something or not. If you want something, you will never get it. This is the way of God the Exalted. Ordinarily, people worship for rewards. If you reach a higher level, you will worship Allah solely because He is your Lord. You love Him and you seek His love. The higher level is to worship for the love of the community. Like Sheikh Bayazid al-Bistami, who asked, O God the Exalted, they are your creation. Make me the scapegoat for all of them. Let no one enter the fire. Take me instead. To whom do you make sajda? Are you making that prostration to God the Exalted, or are you making it to wealth and to this world? You must think about this. You must ask yourself, am I really doing this for God the Exalted? That prostration is the key to the place which lies beyond this world, beyond the senses, beyond the bounds of your everyday perceptions and desires. Without this key, your trust will not open. What we know as our life in this world is only the tip of the iceberg. There is a much larger part of our existence which we know nothing. No one should imagine that his trust has opened in this world. This world cannot begin to contain the dimensions of the spirit. The important point. No one should imagine that his trust has opened in this world. This world cannot even begin to open to contain the dimensions of the spirit. This world is too narrow, too small. For what Allah has installed for us. But we have to be ready for that, to prepare ourselves with humility. Our way is a path that leads in that direction, and inshallah, one day, God the Exalted will open these things to us. He is generous. The gifts He has in store for us are too big for this world. Our exile here in this world. Remember, we're exiled from paradise. Adam was living in Jannah, in the paradise. He was exiled to this state in this world that we are all the inheritors of, but for a time. This isn't where we should be or where we will return to. We're exiled here so we can learn. Our exile here in this world ends in the grave, and it is there He will open these things up for us. But we only pray, O my Lord, we are not asking you to open our trust in this world. like an ordinary reward. You are the most generous of the generous. You make your servants happy. Grand Sheikh relates, in the time of Sayyidina Abdul Khalik al-Gujrani, there was an epidemic and thousands were going to die. He looked at all his students' hearts to find someone able to lift that affliction. He looked right and left. And in Grand Sheikh's words, he looked and he looked and he didn't find them except two between all his students, like Adnan and Hisham, and they owned two big oxen. In that time, people owned one plough ox that they used in their daily tasks. He said, "Oh, my children, I didn't find except you." He called them and said, "Oh, my children, there is a big plague coming, and I am asking God the Exalted to take away that plague. And in order that I will be able to take away that plague, Allah showed me through a vision Sayyidina Muhammad saying to me, Ya Abdul Khalik, let someone slaughter his ox, bring that to me, and I will write on the skin of the ox some verses of the Holy Quran. And I didn't find anyone except you two capable of doing that. So I am asking you to bring your oxen, each one of you. Allah aqdir an aqalifu gayruka. I cannot ask anyone to carry that task except you both. So go and get your oxen and come. These two were Fana fil Sheikh. If the Sheikh tells them, slaughter yourself, they would even do that for his sake. وَمِنْ اللَّهِ تَوْفِيقٌ بِخُمَاتِ الْفَاتِحَةِ أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. I hope you find this beneficial and interesting, and inshallah I look forward to seeing you on Monday, where I will be returning back to the chaplaincy office for my weekly sohbet and Sufi meditation. You're most welcome to join me on Monday if you're in the Birmingham area and want to join us around 5 p.m. onwards. And I look forward to seeing you there. Until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And if you're in the UK or wherever it's morning, have a very good morning.